The icy air of the Dakota Territory bit through Willa Keene's thin cotton dress as she scrubbed the rough wooden floors of the rusty nail saloon, her raw, reddened hands trembling with exhaustion as dawn threatened to break over the distant horizon. 6 months a widow, and here she was, on her knees in a place her late husband would have forbidden her to even walk past, all because Silas Thornton had called in the mortgage on their small homestead the very day after they'd lowered Daniel's pine box into the frozen ground. It was 1878, and the promise of gold in the Black Hills had transformed Deadwood from a mining camp to a burgeoning town almost overnight. But for Willa, it had only brought misfortune. At 26, she had already known more grief than most women twice her age. The loss of her husband to pneumonia had left her with nothing but debts and memories. "You missed a spot, Mrs. Keene." The raspy voice of Madame Vivian, the saloon owner, came from behind her. The woman stood in her silk robe, a cigarette dangling from her rouged lips, her eyes hard despite the hour. "When you finish here, the spittoons need emptying before the morning customers arrive." Willa nodded silently, pushing back a strand of copper hair that had escaped her once neat bun. She'd been scrubbing since the saloon closed at 2 in the morning, after serving drinks to miners and cowboys for 8 hours before that. Her back ached, and her knees felt like they'd been beaten with a hammer. "Yes, Madame Vivian," she replied, her voice barely audible as she dipped her brush back into the bucket of soapy water. "And don't think I didn't notice you turning down Jasper's offer last night," Madame Vivian added, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're pretty enough, and widows can't afford to be particular. Next time a paying customer takes an interest, you'd be wise to smile prettier. The room and board I provide isn't charity." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Willa felt her throat tighten as she scrubbed harder, not daring to look up. She'd taken this job out of desperation, but she'd drawn a line at certain services Madame Vivian expected from her other girls. How long before that line was erased by hunger or the coming winter? The front door of the saloon creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air and the pale light of early morning. Madame Vivian turned with an irritated huff. "We're closed. Can't you read the sign?" "Madam, I can read just fine when there's something worth reading," came a deep, measured voice. "I'm looking for Marshal Dawson." Willa glanced up despite herself. A tall man stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble. A leather duster hung from his shoulders, and the glint of a badge caught the lamplight. "The marshal's office is down the street," Madame Vivian said, her tone suddenly sweeter. "Though you're welcome to wait for him here. He often stops by for breakfast." The stranger stepped fully into the saloon, and Willa quickly lowered her head, not wanting to be caught staring. But not before she'd seen his eyes a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Much obliged," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair shot through with strands of copper. "Name's Garrett Young, Deputy Marshal out of Cheyenne." Willa kept her head down, scrubbing with renewed vigor, hoping to become invisible. Lawmen made her nervous these days. Since Daniel's death, it seemed every authority figure in town was somehow in Thornton's pocket, ready to remind her of her debts and her place. "Coffee, Deputy." Madame Vivian's voice had taken on a silky quality that Willa recognized as her business tone. "That would be kind," he replied, and Willa heard the scrape of a chair as he sat at one of the tables. She worked her way backward toward the bar, keeping her eyes on the floor. If she could just finish quickly, perhaps Madame Vivian would let her rest for an hour before the morning customers arrived. "Girl," Madame Vivian snapped as she moved behind the bar. "Fetch more wood for the stove. It's freezing in here." Willa set down her brush and stood, her legs protesting as she straightened. She kept her eyes lowered as she passed the deputy's table, acutely aware of his presence. Outside, the pre-dawn air was even colder than it had been inside. Willa hugged herself as she hurried to the woodpile at the back of the saloon. Her thin dress provided little protection, and her fingers were numb as she gathered an armload of split logs. As she turned to go back inside, she came face to face with Jasper Mullins, one of the saloon's regular patrons and the man who'd made unwelcome advances the night before. "Mrs. Keene," he slurred, clearly still drunk from the previous night's revelry. "Fancy meeting you out here all alone." Willa took a step back, her heart pounding. "Excuse me, Mr. Mullins. I need to get this wood inside." He moved closer, blocking her path. "Now don't be unfriendly. I offered to help you out last night and you turned me down flat, made me look a fool in front of my friends." His hand shot out, gripping her arm. "That wasn't very nice." "Please," Willa said, trying to pull away without dropping the wood. "I need to get back inside." "Inside, outside, doesn't much matter to me," Mullins said with a leer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Your husband's been dead long enough. Time you remembered what it's like to be with a man." Willa was preparing to scream or fight, she hadn't decided which, when a shadow fell across them. "The lady asked you to let her pass," came the deputy's calm voice. Mullins' grip loosened slightly as he turned to face the newcomer. "This ain't your business, stranger." "It is now." Deputy Young stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his holster. "I believe the lady has work to do and you're interfering." For a moment, Mullins looked like he might argue, but something in the deputy's steady gaze made him think better of it. He released Willa's arm with a shove that sent her stumbling backward, nearly dropping her load of wood. "Fine. She ain't worth the trouble anyhow." He spat on the ground and staggered away down the alley. Willa stood frozen, her heart still racing, until the deputy stepped forward. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Thank you, deputy. I should get this inside." She moved a step around him, but he spoke again, stopping her. "You work for Madame Vivian?" The question made her flush with shame. I clean for her and serve drinks," he nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's hard work, I imagine." "It's work," she replied simply. "Excuse me, please." He stepped aside and Willa hurried past him, back into the relative safety of the saloon. She felt his eyes on her as she went, and something about his gaze made her feel both exposed and protected at the same time. Inside, Madame Vivian was waiting impatiently. "Where have you been?" "The stove's nearly out." "I'm sorry," Willa murmured, kneeling to feed logs into the iron stove. She was aware of the deputy returning to his seat, watching the exchange with interest. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of exhaustion. Willa finished scrubbing the floors, emptied the spittoons, and wiped down the bar, all while trying to ignore the presence of Deputy Young, who sat nursing his coffee and occasionally exchanging words with the other early patrons who drifted in. Marshal Dawson finally arrived around 8, and the two lawmen retreated to a corner table where they spoke in low tones. Willa tried not to eavesdrop, but she couldn't help overhearing fragments of their conversation, something about a gang of cattle rustlers and a planned bank robbery in Deadwood. By mid-morning, Willa was swaying on her feet. She hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, and her body was beginning to shut down despite her determination to keep working. "Girl," Madame Vivian's sharp voice cut through her fog of exhaustion. "Take these glasses upstairs and wash them properly." "They're still sticky." Willa nodded, gathering the tray of glasses. As she turned toward the stairs, the room seemed to tilt. The tray slipped from her hands, glasses shattering on the floor with a crash that seemed to echo in her head. "Clumsy fool," Madame Vivian shrieked, striding toward her. That's coming out of your pay. Willa stared at the broken glass, tears of exhaustion and despair welling in her eyes. She knelt to begin picking up the pieces, not caring when one sliced into her finger. "Leave it," came a commanding voice. Deputy Young stood from his table, approaching them. "The lady's exhausted. She needs rest, not more work." Madame Vivian's face hardened. "With all due respect, Deputy, this is my establishment and she's my employee. I'll decide when she rests." "How long has she been working?" he asked, his tone level but his eyes hard. "That's none of since 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon," Willa said quietly, surprising herself with her boldness. "I haven't slept." The deputy's jaw tightened. "That's inhumane, madam. No one can work that long without rest." Madame Vivian sneered. "Inhumane? This isn't a charity, Deputy. Mrs. Keene here has debts to pay, and she's lucky I gave her work at all. Most respectable places wouldn't hire a woman with her circumstances." "What circumstances might those be?" he asked, his gaze shifting to Willa, who still knelt among the broken glass. "Her husband left her with nothing but debts," Madame Vivian said dismissively. "She lost their homestead. She'd be on the street if not for my generosity." The deputy was silent for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out several bills. "This should cover the broken glasses and a day's wages. Mrs. Keene is coming with me." Willa's head snapped up in shock. "What?" Madame Vivian's eyes narrowed. "She's not for sale, Deputy, if that's what you're thinking." "I'm thinking she needs a decent meal and some rest," he replied coldly. "And perhaps a more humane employer." "And who might that be?" "You," Madame Vivian laughed. "Planning to take her back to Cheyenne with you, are you, if necessary?" He extended his hand to Willa. "Madam, will you come with me?" Willa stared at his outstretched hand, her mind racing. She didn't know this man, had no reason to trust him. But the alternative was to stay here, where she knew exactly what awaited her: endless work, Madame Vivian's cruelty, and men like Jasper Mullins. Eventually, she'd be too exhausted or desperate to say no. Slowly, she placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. "I need my things," she said quietly. "Where are they?" he asked. "I have a room in the attic. It's not much, just a bag of clothes and a few keepsakes," he nodded. "Go get them. I'll wait right here." Madame Vivian stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "You walk out that door, Willa Keene, and don't think about coming back. There are plenty of desperate women who'd be grateful for what I've given you." Willa met her eyes for the first time. "I know. That's why you chose me." "Because I was desperate." She turned and headed for the stairs, her legs shaking but her back straight. In the tiny attic room she'd called home for the past 4 months, she quickly gathered her meager possessions: 2 dresses, a nightgown, her husband's pocket watch, their wedding photograph, and a small leather-bound Bible. Everything fit into a single carpet bag that had seen better days. When she returned downstairs, Deputy Young was waiting by the door, his hat in his hands. The saloon had fallen silent, every eye on them. "Ready?" he asked simply. She nodded, clutching her bag like a shield. Outside, the morning sun was bright, making her squint after the dimness of the saloon. A handsome chestnut gelding was hitched to the post outside, saddled and ready. "This is Thunder," the deputy said, patting the horse's neck. "He's steady and strong." Willa looked at the horse, then at the deputy. "Where are we going?" "First, to get you some breakfast," he said. "Then we can discuss your options." "My options," she repeated, the words feeling strange in her mouth. It had been so long since she'd had any. He nodded, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Keene, I want to be clear. I'm not expecting anything from you. I saw someone in trouble and I wanted to help, that's all." The sincerity in his blue eyes made her throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good," he said, seemingly satisfied. "Now can you ride?" "Yes," she said. "My husband and I had a farm. I rode often." He smiled for the first time, transforming his serious face into something remarkably handsome. Excellent. He secured her bag to the saddle, then mounted with easy grace and extended his hand down to her. Up you come. With a deep breath, Willa took his hand and allowed him to pull her up behind him. She hesitated before placing her hands lightly on his waist. You'll want to hold on tighter than that, he said, amusement in his voice. Thunder likes to show off for the ladies. Despite everything, Willa felt a smile tug at her lips. She tightened her grip, feeling the solid warmth of him through his coat. With a gentle nudge, he set the horse in motion, and they rode down the main street of Deadwood, past the very bank the deputy had been discussing with the marshal earlier. Willa was acutely aware of the curious stares they attracted the deputy marshal and the widow from the saloon, riding together in broad daylight. People are staring, she murmured against his back. Let them, he replied. You've nothing to be ashamed of, Mrs. Keene. They rode to a small cafe on the edge of town, where the deputy helped her down from the horse with gentle hands. Inside, he led her to a table by the window and ordered coffee, eggs, bacon, and hot cakes for them both. Willa sat stiffly, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the strangeness of the situation. When the food arrived, she realized how hungry she was. She tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but it had been so long since she'd had a proper meal that her restraint quickly abandoned her. Deputy Young ate his own food without comment, seeming to understand her hunger. Only when she'd cleared her plate and was cradling a second cup of coffee did he speak again. Mrs. Keene, I need to be honest with you about why I came to Deadwood. She tensed, waiting. I'm tracking a gang that's been rustling cattle and robbing banks across the territory. We have information they're planning to hit the Deadwood Bank in the next few days. He leaned forward, his voice low. One of their members is a man named Silas Thornton. Willa nearly dropped her cup. Thornton, he nodded, his eyes sharp on her face. You know him, He's the man who took my farm after my husband died, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He called in our mortgage the day after the funeral, said Daniel had taken an additional loan that I knew nothing about. Deputy Young's expression darkened. That fits his pattern. He finds vulnerable homesteaders, offers loans with impossible terms, then seizes their property when they can't pay, usually after some tragedy befalls them. Are you saying? Willa couldn't finish the question. I can't prove it, but yes, I believe Thornton may have had something to do with some of these tragedies. Your husband's death might have been natural, or Thornton might have hurried it along, she finished, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. Daniel had fallen ill so suddenly, declining faster than the doctor could explain. The deputy nodded grimly. I need to catch him and his gang in the act, but in the meantime, I couldn't leave you in that saloon. Thornton has eyes everywhere, and if he realized I was asking questions about him, you might have become a target. So you rescued me to protect me, Willa said, understanding dawning. Not out of simple kindness, his eyes softened. Both, Mrs. Keene, I would have helped you regardless. But knowing your connection to Thornton made it more urgent. She absorbed this, her tired mind struggling to make sense of everything. What happens now? Now you need rest, he said firmly. I've taken a room at the hotel for you. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. You can sleep while I continue my investigation. And after that, after you catch Thornton, the question hung between them. Deputy Young met her gaze steadily. That depends on you. You could stay in Deadwood, find respectable work now that you're free of Madame Vivian. Or. She prompted when he hesitated. Or you could come to Cheyenne. It's a growing city with opportunities for a woman of your intelligence and character. I could help you get settled. Willa studied him, This man who had swept into her life like a character from one of the dime novels that occasionally circulated through the saloon. "Why would you do that?" He smiled slightly. "Let's just say I believe in second chances, Mrs. Keene. Everyone deserves one." She wondered what his story was, what had shaped him into a man who would rescue a stranger from a saloon floor. But those questions would have to wait. Exhaustion was pulling at her again, making her eyelids heavy. "I think I'd like to take you up on that room now," she said softly. He nodded, leaving money on the table for their meal. Outside, he helped her onto Thunder again, and they rode to the Deadwood Hotel, a modest but respectable establishment a few streets away from the saloon district. The clerk raised his eyebrows when Deputy Young requested a room for his sister, but the flash of the deputy's badge silenced any questions. Willa was too tired to feel embarrassed about the deception. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed that looked like heaven to Willa's exhausted body. Deputy Young set her bag down by the door. "Lock this behind me," he instructed. "Don't open it for anyone but me. I'll check on you this evening." She nodded, swaying slightly on her feet. He turned to go, then paused. "Mrs. Keene, Willa, I promise you're safe now." The sound of her given name on his lips made her look up at him. "Thank you, Deputy Young. Garrett," he said with a small smile. "If I'm calling you Willa, you might as well call me Garrett." "Thank you, Garrett," she whispered. After he left, she locked the door as instructed, then fell onto the bed without even removing her shoes. Sleep claimed her instantly, deep and dreamless. When she woke, the room was dark except for a strip of moonlight coming through the curtains. For a moment she was disoriented, expecting to find herself in her attic room at the saloon. Then memory flooded back: the deputy, the escape, Thornton's possible connection to Daniel's death. A soft knock at the door made her sit up quickly. "Willa, it's Garrett." She hurried to the door, unlocking it to find him standing in the hallway, his expression serious. "May I come in? I have news." She stepped back, allowing him inside. In the lamplight from the hallway, she could see a fresh bruise forming on his cheekbone. "You're hurt," she said, reaching up instinctively to touch his face. He caught her hand gently. "It's nothing. I've had worse shaving." He moved past her into the room, lighting the lamp on the bedside table. "How are you feeling? Better after some rest?" She nodded, suddenly aware of her rumpled appearance. She smoothed her dress self-consciously. "Much better. What's happened?" "Thornton and his gang made their move earlier than we expected. They tried to rob the bank this afternoon." His eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "We were waiting for them. The marshal and I, along with some deputies from the surrounding towns. We've arrested 5 of them, including Thornton." Relief washed over Willa like a wave. "He's really caught. He can't hurt anyone else. He's caught," Garrett confirmed. "And based on the evidence we've gathered, and the testimony of one of his gang members who's turning state's witness, he'll hang for murder and robbery." She sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. "I can hardly believe it." After all this time, feeling like he was always just out of reach, always holding power over me. "He can't hurt you anymore," Garrett said, sitting beside her. "In fact, there's more news. The judge has already issued an order for restitution. Your farm will be returned to you, along with any other properties Thornton seized illegally." Willa stared at him in disbelief. "My farm? I can go home," he nodded, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. "If that's what you want." She thought of the small homestead where she and Daniel had spent their brief marriage. It had been a good place, with fertile soil and a sturdy cabin, but it was also filled with memories of loss and struggle. "I don't know if that is what I want," she admitted. "I loved that farm once, but now it feels like part of a different life." Garrett's eyes softened. "You don't have to decide right away. The farm will be there if you want it. You could sell it, use the money to start fresh somewhere else." Like Cheyenne? She asked, watching his reaction. A faint smile touched his lips. Cheyenne would be lucky to have you. Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change in the air. Willa became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth radiating from his body. "Why did you really help me, Garrett?" she asked quietly. "The truth." He was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her face. "When I walked into that saloon and saw you on your knees scrubbing that floor, something inside me broke. You looked so determined, so dignified despite everything. I couldn't walk away." Willa felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "You don't even know me." "I'd like to," he said simply, "if you'll let me." She looked down at her hands, the redness from scrubbing already beginning to fade. "I've been a widow for 6 months. I'm not sure I know how to be anything else yet." Garrett reached out slowly, taking one of her hands in his. His palm was calloused but gentle. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Willa. Just a chance to know you better. The rest can wait." She looked up at him, this man who had ridden into her life and changed it in a single day. There was kindness in his face and patience and something else that made her heart beat faster. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the hills. "Good. Because I have to return to Cheyenne in 3 days, and I was hoping you might consider coming with me." "As what?" she asked, needing clarity. "As my friend," he said. "For now. I have a sister in Cheyenne who runs a boarding house for respectable women. You could stay there, find your footing. And perhaps in time." "In time," she echoed, understanding what he wasn't saying. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, his hand still holding hers. Then he stood, reluctantly releasing her. "You must be hungry. Would you like to have dinner with me? There's a decent restaurant downstairs." Willa smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I'd like that very much." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind. Garrett escorted Willa to the courthouse, where she gave her testimony about Thornton's actions regarding her farm. The judge, impressed by her clear-eyed account and moved by her circumstances, expedited the paperwork to return her property to her. With Garrett's help, she found a lawyer who agreed to handle the sale of the farm for a reasonable fee. She visited it one last time, saying goodbye to the life she had shared with Daniel and making peace with her past. In the evenings, she and Garrett would have dinner together, talking for hours. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, her marriage to Daniel, their dreams for the farm. He shared stories of his youth in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the war, and his decision to become a lawman after witnessing the lawlessness that sometimes plagued frontier towns. With each conversation, the connection between them deepened. Willa found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done since before Daniel fell ill. And she caught Garrett watching her at times, his blue eyes warm with an admiration that made her feel both nervous and exhilarated. On their final evening in Deadwood, they sat in the hotel restaurant, lingering over coffee as the other diners gradually departed. "Are you sure about this?" Garrett asked. "Coming to Cheyenne, I mean. It's not too late to change your mind." Willa considered the question seriously. "I'm sure. There's nothing for me here now but painful memories. I want to start fresh, somewhere new." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "My sister, Eleanor, is looking forward to meeting you. She's already prepared a room at the boarding house. You've told her about me?" Willa asked, curious about what he might have said. A faint blush colored his cheeks. "I may have mentioned rescuing a beautiful widow from a life of drudgery." Willa laughed softly. "Is that how you see it? A rescue, isn't it?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. She shook her head. "I think of it more as an opportunity, one I intend to make the most of." His expression grew more serious. "Willa, I want you to know that I have no expectations. The boarding house is yours for as long as you need it, whether our friendship becomes something more or not." She reached across the table, boldly taking his hand. "I know. That's one of the things I admire about you, Garrett Young. Your kindness comes without conditions." His fingers tightened around hers. "Not entirely without conditions," he admitted. "I do hope one day when you're ready." "When I'm ready," she agreed softly, her heart fluttering at the promise in his eyes. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Willa wore her best dress, recently cleaned and pressed, and the new bonnet Garrett had insisted on buying her. Her few possessions were packed in her old carpet bag, along with the money from the sale of some of Daniel's tools, a small reserve for her new beginning. Garrett met her in the hotel lobby, his smile brightening when he saw her. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. Outside, Thunder waited patiently, saddled and ready for the journey. Garrett secured Willa's bag, then helped her mount, settling her comfortably before swinging up behind her. This time, when his arms came around her to take the reins, she didn't stiffen or pull away. Instead, she leaned back slightly, allowing herself to feel the solid strength of him at her back. "Ready?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. She nodded, taking one last look at the town that had seen her lowest moments. "Ready." As they rode out of Deadwood, the morning sun gilding the hills around them, Willa felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her. Ahead lay Cheyenne, a new town, new people, new chances. And beside her, or rather, behind her, was a man who had seen her at her worst and still found something in her worth cherishing. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in 6 months, she was eager to find out. The past was behind her, like Deadwood receding in the distance. Before her stretched the open land, wild and beautiful and full of promise. Garrett's arms tightened slightly around her as if he could read her thoughts. "It's a good day for a new beginning," he said. Willa smiled, tilting her face up to the sun. "Yes," she agreed. "Yes, it is." The journey to Cheyenne took several days, with nights spent at small inns along the stage route. By the time they rode into the city, Willa and Garrett had fallen into an easy companionship, comfortable with each other in a way that felt both novel and somehow familiar. Cheyenne was larger than Deadwood, more established, with proper streets and substantial buildings. The railroad had brought prosperity, evident in the busy thoroughfares and well-dressed citizens. As they rode through town, Willa took it all in with wide eyes, hope blooming in her heart like a flower turning toward the sun. "Welcome to your new home," Garrett said as they approached a handsome 3-story house on a tree-lined street. "Welcome to your second chance." Willa smiled up at him, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. "Our second chance," she corrected gently, and was rewarded with a smile that promised everything her heart had begun to wish for.